episodes in, we've been around the world in F1, WRC, NASCAR, IndyCar, sports cars, you name it, and we've been there. And judging by the response from you guys listening at home, well, we've picked some of your favorite motorsport stars to do it with as well. Last guy we had, Emanuele Pirot. I can't think of a more lovely bloke. I've watched him race. He's contrasted with this kind of steely determination and raw talent. It means he's enjoyed a really long career, and it showed, didn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, what an absolute legend. I mean, it's funny because I've known, or I've been around the racetracks with Emanuele for so many years, but never really had chance to have a conversation with him or kind of really find out about his career. And when I was researching his career for the podcast, I was kind of just amazed how much he's actually achieved. You know, even more, he was even more of a legend than I even thought. And that's the beauty of this podcast is, you know, you get a chance to spend some time and speak to some of the legends of the sport. And you know, today's podcast is no exception, and I think it's going to be a great guest.
Yes, now there has been a bit of a super touring theme lately, and that's been no bad thing, according to those of you listening at home. Getting the lowdown from Steve Soper on that 1992 incident at Silverstone, among other things, incited a visit to our virtual studio from none other than John Cleland. And you all enjoyed that back-to-back combo so much that we thought we'd better complete the picture. Few would disagree that being a BTCC champion in the 90s made you a household name. But for those few who would, as presenter of the BTCC coverage now on ITV4, there simply is no argument. Welcome to Spinning Wheels, Tim Harvey.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Now, there's a thing, there's this really big black hole anywhere that you read about your career, because anyone who just Googles you or reads on your career thinks that you arrived suddenly in a touring car, but you can't have done. So pre-87, when you were driving a glorious Rover Vitesse, what happened? Fill the black hole in for us.
Yeah, well, I mean, quite a lot of people know. I mean, I came out of karting, which I did as a hobby, but quite competitively, just with my brother, and went into just local Formula Ford racing at Brands Hatch. I lived in Kent, 10 minutes from Brands. They had a really good Formula Ford Champion of Brands series back in the day. And I had a friend, Ian Blackman, who ran Auriga Racing Services, which was a really good semi-works Van Diemen team. And he'd seen me karting and given me a test in one of the cars and said, look, I'll help you to do a few races. So I sold all my karting gear and bought a 2-year-old rolling chassis off Ian, and he loaned me an engine and some second-hand tyres. And so I started off doing single-seaters. But to cut a long story short, I had a bad accident in 1986 in the first round of the British Formula Ford Championship at Silverstone and shattered both my ankles really badly. So I was out of racing completely for that year, but I had a good sponsor at the time. And it made sense to try and do touring cars just because I didn't have the movement in my ankles to drive a single seater, but using your legs a little bit more, it seemed like the right thing to do to go to touring cars. They were involved with Austin Rover. This is Istil I'm talking about. And so the Rover Vitesse was a natural home for me and them as a sponsor. And away we went with me as the youngest driver on the grid in 1987, believe it or not.
Those cars were big, lumbersome beasts, but they've become somewhat of a legend when you see them in the. And in fact, there was one competing at Donington at the weekend where you and Guy were in the historics, wasn't there?
Yeah. Ken Clark was out in fact, the 83 car from Steve Soper, the Hepalite car.
Yeah.
But they're just lovely cars. Everybody loves the sound of those Rover V8s. They were actually a bit of a big cuddly giant, bear. They were great fun to drive. But as a learning and an introduction to touring cars, for me, I couldn't have had a better car.
Yeah, they definitely don't look like a racing car, do they? They're big, like I say, big old heavy, or they look heavy. It's probably a bit like the Bentley with the GT3 car. It doesn't look like it should be a.
It's like a Ferrari Daytona with a boot.
Yeah, exactly. But like you said, they kind of come like it's like a cult car now. You see them, You see them at Goodwood a lot, and as you say at Donington, and they really do shift. So yeah, very impressive.
Well, I have to say, we thought that they were hugely powerful in their day. By today's standards, they really weren't very powerful. But they certainly, got on and moved. There were other cars like Holden Commodores and some quite cool cars in that period, just prior to the sort of Sierra Cosworth domination.
Talking of which, you had a piece of the action there as well, didn't you?
In Cosworths, yeah, very much so. Yeah, 88 and 89 with 89 and 90 with the Labatt Sierras, with Lawrence Bristow, cars run by Andy Rouse, and just incredible couple of years, really.
I mean, what a great era. Those cars were so iconic, and again, still racing today, and just what a fantastic machine. At what point, Tim, did you start to feel like you kind of were showing some real promise, or you felt like, because really your sort of experience would be still quite minimal at that point, really, the first couple of years of touring cars. At what point did you start to think, actually, I could be I'm pretty good at this, I could actually make this a career?
Well, I mean, in those days, you drive a lot of things, and I was actually doing Group C racing as well. So in 88 and 89, I did the British Sports Car Championship, which is like the British GT Championship now. But in those days, it was actually for Group C cars, or Group C2 cars. So I did that. I won the championship 2 years running, first with a Tiger and second with a Spice in 89. And that got me a couple of drives in the World Sports Car Series with Spice. And then I actually signed up to do the whole World Sports Car Championship with them in 1990. So I was racing Group C as well. And if I'm honest, that's where I really wanted to go. I wanted to be like you see, Guy.
But you won Le Mans in your class, didn't you, in 87?
Yeah, the first year. But unfortunately, Group C changed very quickly after that, and touring cars, if you like, suddenly took off. So I sort of focused my career very much on that.
Was that obvious then at that point? Because obviously I grew up in the super touring era, and it was just superstar drivers, superstar cars. But was it obvious that the shift had suddenly started?
Yeah, I think it was actually. There was growing manufacturer interest even at the beginning of the 90s. It was growing big time. And obviously I got my break with BMW officially in 92. And, at that point, you're driving for a manufacturer and you're going to make the most of that and the following years.
Yeah, those Listerine cars were fantastic cars. How was it having Steve as a teammate? I mean, it must have been, a tough teammate. Obviously, somebody that's done a lot of touring cars, good relationship with BMW, and arguably one of the best touring car drivers, of his time. And, it must have been a real challenge, but also in a good way, to kind of really test yourself.
Yeah, it was. Steve was. Because of his Austin Rover involvement, I'd known Steve before through, I'd raced Metro Turbo, the computer vision cars, a couple of times. I'd been part of the Austin Rover sort of development thing. I'd been the under-23 Metro Challenge scholarship winner. So I got involved with Austin Rover and therefore Steve, because Steve had come through Metros as well. So I already knew Steve prior to that. So he was already a bit of a hero of mine, if I'm honest. He really was. And obviously he'd done the Group A stuff with Eggenberger, and he really was Mr. Touring Cars.
Yeah.
And to be sharing with him was absolutely fantastic. It was, we had a fantastic team. I know, Vic Lee has his critics for the things he did away from the circuit, and quite rightly so. But you won't find anybody that was involved with Vic who won't say that he ran a fantastic racing team.
Yeah. He was so passionate as well, wasn't he? I remember seeing him on TV on the pit wall, and it was part of the character of the event.
In any motor racing team, Guy will know this, if you've got a charismatic leader, it sets the whole mood of the team. And Vic was that person, his attention to detail, his desire to get the best all the time was incredible, and his motivation for the guys, they would walk over hot coals for him. So we had this great team sort of spirit, and we were out there because there were two BMW teams. There was us and there was ProDrive with the mobile cars, so we were out to try and beat them. And Steve was a great development driver. I mean, he picked up on the, if you like, the weak link in the 318 IS fairly sort of soon into the season, which was a flexing rear beam. And, you know, we got that sorted, and the rest is sort of history, if you like. But to work with Steve was just absolutely fantastic. He was a hero of mine, and to judge your pace against him, you know, was a real challenge.
You must have gone up against him in the Sierras as well, did you?
Not really, because he was racing in the European Touring Car Series.
Okay, he did the odd race over here, didn't he?
He did the odd race, but I never really had a sort of back-to-back battle with him. So I never really did at that point. But, you know, obviously we did within the touring cars, and you know, the very few occasions that I was able to beat him, I sort of count as some of my best ever races.
You talk of charismatic leaders, obviously just stepping back again to the Austin Rover days. Tom Walkinshaw is a fascinating character and someone who I always like to ask about. A bit like people who've worked with Enzo Ferrari or Bernie Ecclestone. Yeah. What was he like?
Right, I'll tell you everything about Tom quickly, if you like. he was great to know as a competitor in the paddock. He was a pain in the arse to work for in any capacity, because he ruled his whole empire on this fear basis. So everybody was scared of everybody higher up in the food chain, if you like. And that was just how he got results. But then away from that, he was absolutely fine. But, you know, so I knew Tom because of touring cars and Group C, in fact. I mean, when I was racing Spice, he was obviously running the Silk Cut Jaguars.
Yep.
The sort of first time I saw another side to Tom was myself and Fermin Velez finished fourth on the road at Donington in the World Sports Car Championship, behind two Silk Sauber Mercedes and one Silk Cut Jaguar in third. And the Silk Cut Jaguar got disqualified for using too much fuel. And so we were promoted to third, but we didn't actually get on the podium and enjoy it at the time. And then a week later, a box arrived, and it was the third place trophy that Tom Walkinshaw had sent to me. And I thought, well, that's quite, you know, that's an interesting sort of, you know, people wouldn't necessarily know that. And then another good thing was after I'd raced with Volvo in '95, a couple of years later, he asked me to do Bathurst in the S40 when it was the 2-litre race. And in conjunction with a couple of other cars, I had a huge accident on some oil that was dropped at the top of the dipper and ended up in hospital with some sort of internal injuries, shall I say, to the crown jewels, which was actually a week before my wedding.
Oh, no.
And Tom sort of upgraded my flight to a first-class flight to get me home, you know, just to be more comfortable, if you like. So those are two good things that people might not know about Tom. A slightly less sort of savoury one, I'll give you two unsavoury ones, if you like, was when I had my first year in the Rover, it was an ex-Andy Rouse car, and the engine blew up after a couple of races. And Rouse didn't do those engines anymore. He moved on to the Ford Mercury XR40i program. So we couldn't go back to him for an engine. But TWR had finished their Bastos ETC program with Rover. So their program was defunct, and they were selling off their equipment. So I went off to see Alan Scott, who was the Kiwi engine guru for TWR, back at their old base at Kidlington, to buy an engine. And anyway, he agreed to meet me, and I walked in, and there were all these beautiful Rover V8 engines sitting on pallets, completely dressed with alternators and everything else wrapped in cellophane. And there must have been 20 of them all sitting there on pallets. And I sort of slightly naively said, well, have you got some dyno sheets or something so I can choose the best one? And he just laughed and he said, don't worry about that. He said, what displacement do you want? We've got 3.5 litre, 3.8, 4 litre and 4.2. And bearing in mind, they were all supposed to be 3.5 litre. That was the sort of slightly unsavoury side, if you like, the way that Tom went racing. I have to say, being naive, I also went for the 3.5 litre engine because I was actually petrified I'd get found out in touring cars. And of course, the other one was when he decided we were going to grease up the forward-facing camera of the Volvo at Snetterton, which cost him initially a ban from the championship and a £10,000 fine. But he had to pay that before the next qualifying session to be allowed back into the championship. So there's a couple of little stories. Actually, my favourite Tom Walkinshaw, if you've got, I don't know if you've got time.
We got
We are. That's why we're here.
Yeah, okay, my favourite Walkinshaw story was at Brands Hatch in '95, driving the Volvo 850, and the first race was wet, and I won the race. Always went well in the wet, and I won the race, and came in, and when Tom was at that meeting, and whenever Tom was at the meeting, the atmosphere, as I said, completely changed. Nobody sort of celebrated or sort of particularly sort of showed their emotions, because Tom ruled on the fear principle. So he just didn't do that. And anyway, after the first race, I came in, and Tom came up to me and he said, well, that was adequate, because his belief was that you went racing to win. So it was merely what you were supposed to do. And that was the result that was to be expected. But in those days, there was 10 minutes between the races, and the starter motor failed between the races. So they had to fix it in the pits, and I was due to start the pit lane from the pit lane for the second race. And Tom wandered down to the sort of to the car when I was sitting at the end of the pit lane, everyone else on the grid, and sort of opened the door to give me some wise counsel. And I said to him, Tom, that was less than adequate. And he didn't see the joke of that. But to finish it, the race started. I started for the pit lane. There was a big shunt on the first lap, and it was red flagged. So they restarted the race, and I was allowed to take up my grid position on the front of the grid.
Oh, perfect.
I won the second race as well, and I'm just dying to get back and see what Tom's got to say now, you see. And I'm sort of literally sort of driving around on the in-lap thinking, right, what am I going to say to Tom? Only to find out that he buggered off 3 laps from the end. So there's some good and bad about Tom.
He sounds like a rewarding character to know if you're on the right side of him. Is that fair?
I think so.
Or did, sorry. Yeah. So, okay, we're into the BMW era then. And little did you know that, up against this hero of yours, Steve Soper, it would be a different name on the trophy that year. But, we'll get to the Silverstone race. That was a hell of a year, because although you'd shown pace in touring cars, I think you'd only won one race prior to that season, hadn't you? And so to go in there and really...
Well, no, I mean, I'd won races in the Rover, and I won races in the Cosworth, the RS 500, and I'd won a race in the E30 BMW. So you're obviously only looking at records that start in 90.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
So I'd won several races before, but that was, obviously the start of the 2-litre era.
Yeah.
I'd only won one race in 1991, which was actually the final race. So I mean, I knew how to win in touring cars, but initially there were no team orders between Steve and I. We were just going out to try and beat everybody else. Steve couldn't do the whole year anyway. I mean, I think, without doubt, one of my best ever races was at Pembrey, when we raced at Pembrey. And I put it on pole in front of Steve, and he was a little bit shocked, because I think he thought he had the pole. And then in a slightly damp, drying race, I beat him fair and square. And he will tell you that. And it was probably one of my sort of proudest and finest moments, because to beat Steve in equal equipment, fair and square was something else. And yes, it's well known that towards the end of the year, he was obviously helping me accrue points, but at that point it was a fair fight.
Yeah.
So we get to Silverstone, and actually it's quite unfair that you get sort of tied into this incident story, because you're actually nothing to do with the incident. You won the race.
I'm glad you pointed that out.
But it's quite funny whenever it's mentioned. It's always mentioned that the rivalry between the three of you, and it sort of doesn't make sense if you watch the race back. For anyone who hasn't watched it, watch it back, because did you feel like a victim at the time?
Not really, no. I mean, I've talked about this many times, as you can imagine, but it was a bit of a poison chalice, really, or a double-edged sword, whatever you want to call it, because although my notoriety is that I was the 1992 champion, and everybody knows it because of that race. And would I rather that I'd won the championship without that incident, but actually nobody really ever remembered it, other than that was what was written in the history books, or rather to have won it and still be talking about it now? And it comes up many times every year. And it was, perhaps a turning point in fan popularity of touring cars. So I think on balance, I'm glad it happened the way it did. I can sort of rest on my laurels and say, look, I knew I was leading at the time. I'd passed John fair and square, and whoever was in front was going to win. So, I don't have any problem with that. And I guess it's fun to look back on and to talk about it.
It is. And actually, the other two have both said the same thing, that they saw the popularity and the driver stars, if you like, really start to grow from there. Because, everyone was on their feet, weren't they, to coin a phrase. It was one of those.
When you watch the video back, you can hear the crowd. Yeah. You can hear the crowd oohing and ahhing. Like it's a Formula One race and Mansell's winning or something.
Yeah.
It was incredible. And people come up to me very often and say, I was in the grandstand, I was at that meeting, I saw, it just happens all the time. So it was the whole setup for that race, the whole meeting was an incredible sort of story, in the sense that you had Will Hoy driving for Toyota, you had me driving for BMW, you had John driving for Vauxhall, and whoever finished in front was going to win the championship. It was really dead simple maths. All the manufacturers were putting in good money at that point. They all three had their full page national press adverts ready to go the next day. So there were going to be two disappointed drivers and manufacturers, whatever happened. And in a way, I sort of went into that, and I say this to young drivers now who are in that situation. You have to go into a shootout like that with the will to win. You can't protect a win. You have to go for it. And I sort of felt actually that's what John was doing. Having led the championship for so long, he was trying to sort of protect that lead, whereas I had nothing to lose and I was going for it. And that always puts you in a better sort of frame of mind to go out and win a championship. We've seen it in touring cars where, I won't mention names, but there are drivers who have choked, if you like, right at the death, because they've hoped it was going to fall in their lap instead of going out and seizing it. So, for me, it's about who wants to win it badly enough when you come down to a shootout. And, on that day, by God, it was, I was absolutely determined. Yeah.
You must find as well, Tim. Sorry, Paul. Now as well that you're commentating as well, having these sort of rivalries, those kind of rivalries that you were having, back in the Super Touring days, and then latterly now, people like Plato and Neil and all these guys, it must be great to commentate, because when you're commentating, the racing is so, British touring cars is so action packed, and this kind of rivalry thing off track is kind of, it just adds to it, doesn't it? I mean, we spoke with Jason, he was kind of like plays this kind of pantomime villain, but he loves it, because it's part of it. It's part of what makes him so unique. And I think the fans love it, don't they? I mean, certainly, whenever we talk about Super Touring, it's much about the personalities like yourself, like Steve, like John, that people remember as much as it is about the racing itself.
Yeah, funny enough, that's actually how I got the touring car commentary role, was when I did my final year in 2002, and ITV were looking for somebody to take over co-coms in 03, and they said to me, well, you've always got plenty to say for yourself when you get out of the car or when we interview you. Have you ever thought about being a commentator? And so that's how it started. But the reality is, I do sort of live and breathe it almost a bit too passionately in a way. But when the racing starts, I'm almost in that race, I'm watching it, and I'm just seeing situations develop because I've been in that situation before. I can see what's happening. I love the dynamics between drivers and teammates. And going back to your comment about characters, the touring car champ BTCC has always been full of characters, and that's what the crowd love. Their accessibility to it, the fact that you can, on the day of the race, rock up, buy a ticket, walk in, meet that person, get an autograph. There's no other live sport that you can possibly do that at. And so the engagement with fans is tremendous, and that's why they latch on to drivers with character. And it's no secret, in fairness, that, you know, back in the mid 90s, we were aware of that, and we were sort of building it up. You know, I'd say something to wind up John Cleland, he'd say something to wind me up, and we'd carry on the battle in the press, and, you know, it would just create sort of interest and stuff. So you need your Jason Platos, you need these characters in there. And the good thing about BTCC is you can be a character. You haven't got to be one of these professional clones, you know, that have no opinion because they're far too politically correct and daren't say, you know, you don't have to be like that in BTCC.
Well, it's people like Jerry Marshall and people like that sort of set the tone, and it's managed to sort of keep that kind of that feel about it. And I think it's great. And what's funny, you know, when we were talking a little bit earlier on, you said about your sports car racing. You said, I want to be a sports car racer. That's what I wanted to do. And so many people we spoke to, I mean, Emanuele to a certain degree, and some other drivers, they've done touring cars. It's almost like they did touring cars as a sort of second option. Yet, you know, they've had such, you know, like yourself, had such a great career from touring cars, and the racing's amazing, and the championships are fantastic. But for a lot of people, it's always like, it's kind of like their second choice or third choice of their career. But actually, you know, for a lot of people, like Pirro and a lot of drivers, it actually made their careers. You know, it really kind of set them up.
Yeah. I think it was sort of right place, right time, you know, really, rather than anything else. You know, I consider myself really lucky that I raced in the last of the Group A era, as we talked about with Cosworths and the Rovers. I raced Group C World Sports Cars, which was arguably one of the best eras ever of Group C. Yeah. And I raced throughout the 90s in Super Touring. So I pretty much had three, and maybe that's just my age, but I mean, I look back, and as a lot of people do, and think they were three really great.
They're the eras. They're the eras with the liveries, the eras with the battles and the names that you remember. Wasn't touring cars the first championship to put you in the car on the grid with the drivers as well? I remember when you started doing that on the TV coverage. I'm not sure if that was before your time on the coverage, but when they started doing that, no one else was doing that. Talking to the drivers in the car, like when the race was about to begin.
Yeah, I always remember watching sort of Bathurst, and they were talking to the driver, and as they were talking to the driver, whether it was Dick Johnson or whoever it was, the other cars would be overtaking them. You can't do two things at once, you know, and you have to really concentrate. And you know, so I mean, that's why we only talk to drivers on formation laps and during safety cars. You know, you certainly couldn't do it in a sprint race like.
And when they win the title, Colin Turkington's emotion in the car after that was just fantastic.
The TV puts you right in there with that. And you know, that's what I absolutely love, when you see all that emotion just pouring out of somebody, and relief, and you know, everything else that's coming. I mean, that's what makes racing. You know, you don't see that in Formula One enough. You just don't, you know, because they're not really allowed to. You know, it's almost a weakness if you show emotion. I remember Damon Hill when he was fighting Schumacher, you know, he got criticised for being too laid back and too talkative and open and honest. You know, they said, well, you know, you need to be more ruthless like Schumacher is. You know, you can't be like this. So he tried to be like that, even though it's not his normal way. And then he got accused of being boring and uncommunicative. So you can't win. You know, you just can't win.
I remember watching the touring cars, and it's to your point that people remember these moments. It was you and Tom Chilton. It was one of Tom's first races, and I can't even remember where it was, but I remember you got out of the car. You were furious that these young drivers are coming through without their experience, and he'd either taken you out or had made some contact at the first corner. And I just remember those moments. Even though it's a moment in time, I can't remember the race, you know? I
can tell you exactly. It was Brands Hatch.
Was it?
On the last lap, he punted me off at Druids when I was in third place. And I was on a sort of a first, second, third bonus from the team. So I was cheesed off at this young upstart who didn't even have a road license, denied me my third place bonus money, which wasn't a lot, but it was the podium as well, you know. So yeah, I let rip at him at that point, but you know, it made good theatre. You know,
it was good
opportunity, and you know, let him have it.
So I don't want to labour on this because, you know, racing drivers not getting on is not why we came into this, but we have to ask a few questions that people have asked us to ask. And Charlie T on Instagram, one of the questions was 2 questions related to this. Firstly, he said, how is the relationship with John Cleland after 92 now?
Sorry, it's frozen.
Okay, that's right.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
He's
Yeah,
still got me.
yeah, go for it.
All right, Charlie T on Instagram
um,
wants to know, how is your relationship with John Cleland now after 92?
I would say that we have a begrudging professional respect for each other, based on, you know, what we've achieved. But, you know, John is a very well balanced Scotsman. He's got a chip on both his shoulders. You know, it comes across in most of the things he says, but I don't know why he's so bitter and twisted up about it all. You know, look, you know, we chat, of course we chat, we see each other at meetings, and we chat and have a bit of a laugh, and, you know, I'm interested in what he's doing with his boys and going racing and stuff. And, you know, we're never going to clear the air and be chums about what happened back in 92, because he feels it was stolen off him, and, you know, I felt obviously differently. But you know, but it's not as though we can't talk or anything like that.
And he also wants to know, who would you rank as the best touring car driver of all time?
Yeah, difficult one.
It's a horrible question to ask a touring car driver.
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many great drivers. You know, I'd have to pick out Andy Rouse and Steve Soper for sure. You know, but yeah, I'd probably pick one of those two.
Yeah.
So we move on from touring cars then. And oh, I don't know, we can't move on from touring cars just yet because we haven't gone through some of my favorite super tourers. You almost became you drove some of the best cars at the wrong time, and in doing so kind of prepared the way for other people to come in and use those cars to great effect. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, you know, timing is everything in motorsport, and Guy will tell you this. You have crossroads in your career, and you try to make the right decision. Sometimes your hand is forced, and sometimes you make the right or wrong decision of your own accord. But, you know, at the end of 92, I was all pumped up, ready to get a factory contract with BMW, and to sort of be the next Steve Soper and race in Europe and Britain or wherever BMW wanted me to race. I was so pumped up for it. I thought, this is it. You know, I was absolutely committed to the cause. But at the time, BMW were having a big argument about the regulations, the technical regulations with TOCA, about ABS, rear-wheel drive, additional ballast, all this kind of stuff. So they actually withdrew from the British Touring Car Championship right after I'd won the championship. You know, I'd been to Munich and we'd had meetings and all the rest of it, and they pulled out. So, you know, my golden ticket suddenly just didn't exist anymore. And then Renault obviously came knocking with a 2-year deal, and, you know, everything Renault had ever done had been a success. So I thought, well, yeah, I mean, I'll get in at the start of this and enjoy the ride and enjoy sort of developing it and just the whole thing, only to be sort of presented with the Renault 19, which, you know, I've gone on record as though it was the worst touring car ever made. But for its one-off win at Donington at the European Grand Prix in the wet. But that was mainly thanks to the fact it was a Group N car and it ran on Michelin's rather than anything else. You know, so yeah, I famously made that decision wrong. And then, of course, a month after I signed with Renault, BMW settled their argument with TOCA and the technical regulations, came back into the championship, and Joe Winkelhock won the championship in 93 in the car I felt I should have been driving. So, you know, that's the way things go.
You always make the best decision at the time that you feel. You take the information and you go with your gut feeling, and you work to know that way at the end of the day. But then, so you were in the Renault 19 in 93, and then obviously the Laguna in 94. So did you have sort of quite a hand in sort of developing that then, Tim, with the Laguna?
Yeah, I mean,
was Williams running at that point, or not? No.
The first 2-year deal was actually with MCT, a company called Metal Composite Technology at Silverstone, who really hadn't they were a technical company rather than a race team.
Yeah.
And the deal had been done sort of between people at Renault UK and people who they were friendly with at MCT.
Right.
Guys reading between the lines here. And,
yeah.
you know, unfortunately, I felt it was my position to try to drive the project forward. And in doing so, I made myself unpopular, basically, because, you know, a manufacturer deal like that should not have been taken to a team with no touring car experience, all the rest, even though there was help from Renault Sport in front. It just shouldn't have happened that way. So there were people involved both at the team and at Renault UK who I was in a battle with to try and make things right. So I didn't make myself very popular there. But, you know, the intention was to try and, you know, make it better. But the unfortunate result of that was that when the program did go to Williams in the third year, I wasn't part of it. And in fact, I'd already done a deal because I was so pissed off about it all. I'd done a deal with Tom Walkinshaw to go to Volvo. I thought I'd set my own course, if you like. But obviously, in hindsight, it would have been nice to have seen the program with Williams because they ran it absolutely fantastically. The results we all know, you know.
But at the end of the day, you know, you got there as the reigning BTC champion. So, you know, you want to go there and you want to win. You know, you've won the championship. You don't want to go there and, you know, kind of make up the numbers. So you're going to push. Yeah, you're going to go there and you're going to push to try and.
Embarrassing. You know, I'd come from a team, as I said, like Vic Lee's that I've been at for 2 years, where, you know, nothing was too much trouble. They did everything, you know, really incredible team to a team that were really sort of floundering in the dark. And I mean, they didn't get what they thought they thought they were going to get delivered, a sort of a race winning car from Renault Sport. And all they'd have to do was sort of do the operational side in the UK. But unfortunately, Renault Sport had underestimated the job completely. I actually went from a BMW prize giving in Munich at the end of '92, directly over to Renault Sport in Paris to meet the designer and see the first car and all the rest of it. And I mean, apart from the cultural difference between grey boss suits in Munich and flowery Hawaiian shirts and dreadlocks in Renault Sport, which was an interesting cultural sort of change, the first car they presented to me very proudly had a standard pedals and a handbrake in it. And you know, we had moved on from that already. Super Touring. And I sort of said, well, why has it got a handbrake? And they said, well, we've used John Ragnotti as our test driver and he likes to do handbrake turns because he's a rally driver. I thought, well, blimey, you know, talk about, you know.
And what you know, such a competitive championship as well. I mean, look at the teams that are in there and the drivers and the manufacturers. I mean, you know, it was such a competitive time, wasn't it? I mean, you got no chance.
No, and so I mean, I was angry, I was embarrassed, I was frustrated. You know, yes, I was being paid very nicely, but that isn't really why, you know, that's not the reason why you go racing. It's the benefit of it. So it was a difficult year that year.
And then obviously you moved on to Peugeot, onto Volvo TDR, and then onto Peugeot. Did you ever drive the estate Volvo or always the saloon?
I mean, I raced the saloon in '95, but I tested the estate at the end of '94 after I signed the deal, because they only ran it for 1 year. But the reality was that the saloon was identical in terms of chassis, roll cage, suspension, geometry. Everything was identical to the estate, apart from a roof extension and a bit of glass on the rear. Everything else was exactly the same. So the reality was, although it looked incongruous, you know, it didn't really, apart from a bit of aero, it wasn't that different.
I remember
it was such an iconic car, though, wasn't it? It just captured everyone's imagination.
I remember, like, because I was doing Formula Renault at the time. I remember, like, at Knock Hill and all the PR around it, and they had like who would have been driving was it Rydell and
it was Jan Lammers
and Lammers, and they had, like, I don't know, like they had the dogs out there, and it was it was like marketing genius, really. It was definitely very, very different.
Put Volvo on the map, you know, in a way.
It did.
And you know, they were quite cool cars, and in fact the Volvo T5Rs road cars were pretty cool things as
They
well.
were, yeah.
I had one, and it was the most unreliable thing I've ever had. But it was recently, and that's when it's a modern classic, so we can let it off.
Well, our road cars that we used to get, we used to take them down to TWR, and the engine boys would fiddle about with the sort of the wastegate and the sort of and their fish tank hoses and things, and you know, we'd come out there and it would smoke the front tires in third and fourth gear. That was quite good fun.
So in those development years, then, I say development years, you were there as a race driver for Volvo, obviously, but was there a feeling that you were there at the start of a project and you might not be there for, you know, see the fruits of it? Or did you just keep going as you?
No, I mean, actually, I really enjoyed it, actually, despite, you know, I actually, the car was lovely. The Volvo people were lovely. And obviously the guys on the team were all great. It was only the sort of Tom influence occasionally that sort of, you know, I mean, you know, I got on really well with Rickard Rydell. He was one of the loveliest teammates. You know, you couldn't begrudge him if he beat you. Like most teammates, if they beat you, you hate them, but you couldn't begrudge it. He was just such a nice guy. And obviously being Swedish and you know, sort of having the Volvo connection, being a development sort of period, he did tend to get the slightly better stuff, which was fair enough. You know, he was the Volvo Swedish guy, it's fair enough. But, you know, I really enjoyed the time there. I don't regret any of it. And as I say, you know, we did leave on bad terms because Tom asked me back to drive one of the S40s at Bathurst. So there was absolutely no ill feeling at all. And I mean, they put Kelvin Burt in the car. I think they probably didn't realise just how good Rickard was. At the time, and you know, he'd blown off Jan Lammers, but then Jan wasn't really a touring car guy, and then I won't say blew me off, but he certainly beat me, you know, and so I think they were sort of still looking for somebody that they thought was better than Rickard. They put Kelvin Burt in the car, and he did worse than I did, and so, you know, at the end of the day, Rickard was a champion, and they were right to sort of focus on him. And I mean, Tom basically sort of said that to me in years afterwards, really. But you know, Rickard was great. The whole program was great. You know, absolutely loved it. I'd love to have sort of stayed on with it and full time with the S40s, really.
Yeah, we're getting to the bit now where the cars had proper wings. There's just all the bodywork, and they were looking. I mean, the 406 that came next for you is one of, if not the favourite car for me, the way it looks, because it just sits right. And Patrick Watts, who still drives his now, when you see it on one of the HSCC meetings, it's just absolutely fantastic. But it wasn't that great in the end, was it?
No, I mean, it was close, but, you know, the problem was that, you know, and you know, any driver from that era will tell you that every year the game moved on. So, you know, had you been in a position to have sort of next year's car the year before, you'd have dominated anything. So a car that was finishing 6th or 7th 1 year would have won the year before, you know, hands down. So it was just the pace of progress. And, you know, when you see, you know, historic touring car races now and super touring races, whoever's got the last of the Hondas from sort of 2000 is going to win, basically. And that's just the pace of development. If you see a 1991 E30 M3 against a 2000 super touring Honda, you know, the difference is stark. So there was just pace of development. And the problem for Peugeot was that they were literally running the whole program from Peugeot UK. And despite Laurent Aiello winning in Germany in what appeared to be an identical car, there was absolutely zero technical collaboration between Peugeot France and Peugeot UK, which is completely bonkers. So, I mean, Peugeot Sport did their own engines for the German program, and Aiello didn't supply us. So we had to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds doing an engine development program for the UK. You know, complete nonsense as a manufacturer. The chassis were built independently, MSD built ours, and Peugeot Sport built theirs. I mean, you know, from the outside, you think this was completely nonsensical, but it's one of those sort of Anglo French sort of, you know, impasses.
So Macy Camera on Instagram asked, why was the 406 after such a promising year in 97? Why was it so bad in 98? Why was it so different? But is it just the pace of development, or did things drop off?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember exactly why, but there were some things we had got wrong. I'm not denying that. There's a few things we got wrong, but pace of development didn't help either. We're talking now late 90s and stupidly big budgets. Really big budgets, and there was no restrictions on testing, so people had test cars, test teams. There were all the things that you see now that are common components to sort of control parts we didn't have any of that. So diffs were free, tires were free, dampers were free. Everything was like a development race, huge. So
it's fantastic to watch.
No BOP is called, no balance of performance as well.
No, none of that.
Just all go.
It was just mega to watch, though, for that reason. It must have been frustrating to be part of, because you must have had an impending feeling that it couldn't have lasted forever and there was a bubble about to burst somewhere, wasn't there, if you were inside of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem was, I could remember it, at that time from a Peugeot point of view, because what would happen is that the teams would go back to their manufacturers and say, well, Alpha spent 5 million last year. You only spent 2. So if you want to beat them, we've got to spend more money. So then the poor bean counters at the manufacturers are thinking, I don't want to be accused of not giving them the resources to win. So I'll give them the resources to win. But of course, the only outcome of that is if you win, you're happy. And if you don't win, you've blown your reason for being there. When all the teams operated at a level where the price of being involved was repaid with the publicity and everything else, and if you won, it was a bonus. Then that was fine. But the moment you price it to win at all costs, there can only ever be one winner. So of course, everybody else is then, well, we're not happy about this.
It was all your guys' salaries, Tim. That was the problem.
These test teams and tire everything else, but look, I'm not going to complain about that side of it. There were 18 factory drivers, all international names. It was. You look at that. I mean, everyone says it, but 18 fully paid up guys to manufacturers, not to the teams, to the manufacturer on a good earn. So that was incredible time, but it was always going to burst, and not, it wasn't just the money, it was manufacturers towards the end of the 90s facing reduced margins from road car sales, amalgamations of brands under the same umbrella so they wouldn't race against each other. All these things came to mean that it was no longer viable to race against each other at those budgets.
How do you see touring cars today? I mean, obviously you commentate on it, and the racing is really, really quite exciting, but it's quite different to back in the super touring days. Obviously you don't have the manufacturers in the same way, and the big salaries. It's kind of a different landscape now, where a lot of the drivers are kind of finding the funding and bringing it to the team, but that doesn't necessarily detract from the racing itself, because it is really exciting. But it has changed a lot, hasn't it, since those days?
Oh yeah, I mean, then it was a pure form of racing. It was almost prototype Formula One type racing with unlimited budgets. As I say, there was all this testing going on, spare cars, everything, fully professional operation. And, you do all of that development, all of that testing, and you then have qualifying, and you start the cars pretty much in the order that they are obviously, their ability is, and wonder why you don't get great racing. So Alan Gow realised that couldn't last the way it is, and he our rules now mean that people don't tend to win race after race. The fastest car doesn't always start at the front, because you've got success ballast, you've got reverse grids, you've got option tyres. All these things swap around the order, if you like, of merit. So it's the same for everybody. So in that sense, it's still motorsport, but it's not that purest form of motorsport where you start the fastest car at the front and hope you get a good result, and then you're disappointed when you don't.
Yeah.
Phil Taylor asked us on Twitter, and this is poignant, because I tweeted a little while ago when Jason Plato jumped back in the Power Max car. He tweeted to say, "I've forgotten just how good this was. Putting everything into a corner and coming out the other side is still the best thing to do in this world, or something like that. Words to that effect. Phil Taylor asks, would you ever do, I know you were almost the generation before Plato, so it's not a direct comparison, but so would you ever do that? And do you think he's making the right decision going in at this late stage?
Look, I'll be honest. If Jason wants to do it, he's earned the right to do it. And, you know, the old saying, you're only as good as your last race, applies to Jason, because his last race was in 2019 at Brands Hatch, and he won. So, you know, he didn't race last year. So, but, you know, he is still one of the best. He's got 97 wins and is desperate to get that 100 wins. And given the circumstances, I say, of racing with reverse grids, and all, there's no reason why he can't do that. You know, I personally feel that once you get past 50, you are not as sharp as you were at your peak. You know, we're only talking fractions, but that's all it takes. It's just I don't know what Guy would say about this, but it's a thing about timing and just being right on top of your game and really in the zone. And it gets harder as you get older.
Yeah.
You know, you might only see it on the watch by a tenth or two, but you just know it in the car a little bit. So I don't necessarily subscribe that Jason is as good as he was at his absolute best. But don't forget, he probably could afford a tenth or two at his best and still win. Yeah. So don't count him out. And the best thing is that he loves it again. Yeah. He has had a year off, and he's admitted he's done a lot of soul searching in that year, because, you know, for most of us, we go racing because that's what we do. Yeah. And, you know, every year you're banging the drums and the phones to sort of sort out your deal for the next year, because that's what we do. And you do it for year after year after year after year. And, you know, you get to the point, you know, sometimes you don't, but some drivers get to the point and you think, well, why am I doing this? Or, I mean, for me, the big thing was I used to look forward during the year to the last race so that I could step away from it and have a break. Now, what you should be thinking is, I don't want that last race to end because I can't race again until next year. You should be jumping at the bit. But it made me realize that actually that it was the time to get off the merry-go-round and stop racing, you know, modern professional stuff. And literally the moment I did it, it was like flicking a switch and the world was a different place. I mean, I've heard Jason say, you know, his wife, Sophie, says he's a different person when he's not racing. And that's because we're all selfish and we're all focused. And as, you know, from the moment you have a deal with whoever it is, you're thinking about that deal. You might be sitting having dinner with your family, but you're thinking about your racing. You put your head on the pillow and you're thinking about your racing. You wake up in the morning and you're thinking about your racing. And people don't see that. It's just part of being a competitor in a competitive environment. And Jason has had the luxury of a year off because he was probably getting to that stage of just going through the motions.
Yep.
And initially he didn't miss it at all. But then obviously as the year went on, he realized his desire to get back in and do it. And, you know, his driving so far this year has told him he's made the right choice. So he's every reason to be there. And long may it continue. That was a long-winded answer to your question.
No, but these questions lead to really good little stories. And with your insight as the ITV, obviously one of the presenters, that helps as well. It's probably why he asked the question of you, of somebody else. You get that honor as well of having to answer about other people's careers as well as your own in your current job. You went from touring cars to the Porsche Carrera Cup. Am I right in thinking, and this is just how I viewed it at the time, you were there to do a bit of a promo job, do a couple of races, and that was it. And all of a sudden it kind of took off because you actually found that it worked quite well for you. That's how it looked at the time, just as a fan.
Not really. I mean, I sort of had my fill, obviously, of touring cars, you know, with the Peugeot years. And, you know, I knew it was time to quit touring cars. And I wasn't necessarily looking specifically in any one direction of something else to do. I certainly wasn't thinking about retiring, but I wasn't drawn in any particular direction. And I got offered because Porsche ran a guest car. Yeah. And so they offered me a drive in that in one of the races in 2003. and I absolutely loved it. I'd already done a Super Cup race. In fact, Kelvin Burton and I did a Porsche Super Cup race at Silverstone at the Grand Prix. So I had a bit of an inkling that I'd like the car. And I just clicked with it straight away. I think it was a powerful rear-wheel drive car. It completely suited my driving style. I didn't have to think about my driving. I got in the car, did a lap, and the lap time was good. When you do the lap time without, and it comes naturally, that's a really good sort of sign, that you're gelling with the car. So I did a couple of races. I won the second one that I did and beat Richard Westbrook, who was the man at the time. And that sort of opened the door to a drive the following year full time in 2004. But, I didn't see it as being as serious as touring cars. I was doing it to enjoy some of that love of driving again. And to be competitive, to scratch that itch, and because actually there was quite good money in it, from prize money and everything else, and there still is actually. So
you probably drive better as a result, because the fact is the pressure's off, so you're enjoying it, and you probably just driving better as a result.
I have admitted it, but I grew up on rear-wheel drive stuff, driving Mark 1 Escorts on the road, from Formula Ford to Group C to Rovers to Sierras. Until I actually started racing Super Touring, I wasn't a front-wheel drive guy at all. And, so although you learn to drive front-wheel drive, it either comes naturally or it doesn't. And to me, it was always a technique that I had to master, rather than it being natural in say the way I got into the Porsche and the time just came. I had to work at it. And I certainly never enjoyed it, and it wouldn't be my preferred sort of format. So you'd never say it at the time, because it would be professional suicide. All touring car drivers now will tell you they don't have any preference, whether it's front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive. They can do the lot exactly the same. But, I think we probably both know that isn't quite true. So the Porsche just suited me. It was great. I loved it. I love Porsche anyway. I've always been a Porsche man. So everything about it just fitted. The best thing was actually that the races were all at touring car meetings. I was commentating on touring cars and racing in Carrera Cup at the same time.
It was a cool dynamic.
So I could have my cake and eat it. I go to a weekend and I'd be racing and commentating, very often sort of one after the other, which presented some interesting issues on occasions. But I loved it. It was great fun.
I think for me this week, for those who listen will know that I work at Cadwell Park, and you were there this week. It was a pleasure to have you there and see you round in your GT3 RS. But to see a driver, and it's possibly the 92 thing, it's possibly even the fact that you're the touring car presenter now, so people feel like they still know you and still engage with you more than other drivers. But I couldn't get near you to have a chat about this, because there were so many people right from the briefing onwards. You couldn't get out for the sighting laps to begin with, because people just wanted to talk to you about the car, because you've done a lot of, you've had I think you work with a tuning firm, don't you, on that particular car, and so people wanted to know about that. And people every time I walked past, they were asking you about your racing, and you were telling these racing stories, and that was quite nice to see, because quite often we'll have famous and legendary racing drivers turn up and they'll just get on with their thing, and people will walk past and maybe get the odd photo with them, but you genuinely couldn't really get on with your day, could you? And you seem to enjoy that.
I've always been a fairly convivial sort of person, and I've also I came into racing as a sport. My dad was a surveyor, and and raced sprints, autocross, hill climbs, all for fun. Literally it would be a picnic in the back of a Mini or a Lotus Cortina, and we go off to a hill climb or an event. So I grew up believing that racing, if you like, was a sport. When I went karting, I did it with my brother. We didn't do any big teams or anything else. We just did it ourselves as a sport. So I still love and have a passion for motorsport in all its forms. I'm a big motorbike lover as well. That was actually my real first passion, still is.
We should have got you out at the lunchtime over the mountain on a bike, shouldn't we?
Yeah, well, I'm back there actually on the 18th, so I'll see you then, Paul, on a bike.
On a bike?
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'll come home from a weekend and my skybox is full of MotoGP, World Superbikes, NASCAR, Formula One, everything. I'm a complete petrol head, and I don't have a problem in chatting to people, because it's an interest, it's a hobby, whether they're talking to me about what's going on in touring cars or asking me about my car or anything. I enjoy it. It's the nice part of our business.
Yeah. I think my point was they really wanted to talk to you, so you're still relevant, Tim.
And you do a lot of track days, Tim, don't you? See you around a lot of track days and with the Porsche and stuff. I'm
a brand ambassador with Michelin and Tag Heuer and RPM Technic, the independent Porsche company over in Long Marsden, and we do a lot of stuff together, and I really enjoy it. It's whether it's product development or just working with clients and customers, and I really enjoy it. I mean, I love the driving as well. Never get bored. So,
what was the GT3 RS like around Cadwell Park? I know you've raced there in the past, haven't you?
It was pretty mega, actually. I mean, the car is really quick. It's had some good upgrades on it, which we developed sort of, some of it is Manti stuff, so it's off the shelf, but then you develop your own sort of settings and working with Michelin on the...
It looked a lot more composed than I expected it to for how quick you were going, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's really, the car is sorted and planted. And in actual fact, it was really nice to drive Cadwell as opposed to, say, Silverstone Grand Prix or Donington, because, the demands of Cadwell are quite extreme in terms of change of direction, elevation, tight corners. And I mean, I think most of the other Porsche owners there were sort of quite impressed with how quickly the car went round. And, I can drive a bit, but the car is absolutely fantastic. And it was nice to come.
It's like a little Nordschleife, isn't it, Cadwell?
Yeah, a little bit. Exactly.
Paint it green, it'll be the old Grella, whatever they call it, the Manti Porsche. Well, that's great. Should we go on to some quick fire questions, Paul? What do you think?
I think we should. I just want to touch on one little thing first, which I think it's always important, this one. And it, just like Andy Merrick, we talked to him about his BRDC Superstars program. 2007, 2008, I think it was. You became the BRDC Superstars program leader, didn't you?
Yeah, 2008 to 2018.
So
Fantastic.
Just tell us a little bit about that, because that is a program that there's a lot of these schemes and a lot of people come up with things that are designed to help, but this thing genuinely really does get star drivers through, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it came from years ago when Damon Hill was president, and sort of doing a questionnaire amongst members about what things were important to them within the club. And, helping young drivers was very much top of members' list, and there've been various sort of ways that people have helped the club and helped drivers, but never in a really planned, coordinated way. So Damon set up a working group, which I was part of, and Derek Warwick and Andy Priot and all sorts of people were on that group. And, we basically had a few meetings and came up with what was to become the Superstars program, but then realized that we needed someone to direct the program. And that person needed to, be involved in the sport currently, work with young drivers, understand the BRDC, understand the commercial implications of work with manufacturers, all the things that you'd sort of expect. And at some point, all the heads turned in the room and looked at me, and I got the job. And actual fact, I absolutely loved doing it. I really, really enjoyed doing it. And, 11 years was sort of me putting something back into the club and young drivers. And, we had sort of, I think in that time, over 85 drivers through the program. Not all of them achieved great success, but a lot of them did. And I can say with my hand on my heart that we helped every single one of them in some way, shape or form.
Give us a few names, Tim.
Well, I'll end up with the best ones because my final year saw George Russell, Lando Norris, and Alex Albon all graduated to Formula One the following year. So I thought this is a good time to stop now.
Fantastic.
I mean, a lot of what the program does, and Andy probably told you this, is not seen in the wider world. It's making an introduction to a team that, because we've made the introduction, they will then talk to the driver, give them an opportunity, a test or whatever. It's brokering deals that drivers may not necessarily be able to do themselves, and giving them opportunities. It's not just the obvious stuff of sending them off to the Human Performance Centre to get a sort of analysis of where they're at with their physical health. It's all sorts of things. Every question that every one of us has faced in our careers comes up. And it's a really reward. It's very time consuming, hugely time consuming. But, I felt at the end of it that, I wasn't really that current anymore. I wasn't, the young drivers coming up didn't really know me from my, current racing. And in order to have their respect and everything else, I thought it was time to move it on. And Andy had been through the program himself, and obviously, with Bentley and everyone else, he was very much in. He was where I was 11 years before.
Yeah.
He was the perfect person to take over, and he's done a great job.
Yeah.
So Lando, George, or Alex, which one to the title first, Tim?
Depends on the car they get, really, doesn't it? But
True.
you got to. I mean, if George was to step into Mercedes next year, well, probably George. But at the moment, Lando's flying high, isn't he?
He's doing well. He's doing really well. I mean, Formula One this year so far has been. I'm excited about Formula One again because, like yourself, it's Formula One's one of those things you kind of watch the build up, watch the start, go off and cut the grass, and come back in an hour's time and watch the finish. But I think this year is going to be quite an exciting championship by all accounts.
As a motorsport lover, I'm the eternal optimist. I'm the guy that still gets up. We didn't have it this year, but I'd still be getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to watch practice from Melbourne. I'm still a petrolhead, so I'm the eternal optimist that I'm going to see a Formula One race. And obviously, in recent years, that hasn't happened very often. But we've got all the ingredients this year. With obviously Verstappen having a more competitive car. I think Red Bull have probably under-delivered on what they should have done in the first few races.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it is going to be a great season. And, it's good when you see Hamilton pushed and you see that extra element that he has. When he wins the race easily and, just beats Bottas by the odd 30 seconds or something, people go, oh, it's the car, it's easy. But when you see these special performances that he's doing now, you realise that he has got that exceptional ability.
Absolutely, no, 100%. And what I'm enjoying as well this year, Tim, is the sort of inter-team rivalry, because there's quite a lot of new teammates. So obviously Perez, Verstappen, Sainz, Leclerc, and Norris, Ricciardo, for example. That dynamic and how the sort of who's doing what against each other. So it's been really exciting, but yeah, Hamilton is on another level, isn't he? He really is. And like you said, it's those performances where, he gets pushed wide or he has a problem and how he pulls it back. That's where he really shows his class. Because when he's winning easily, it's just like, it's kind of boring for us, but he's really just put on a masterclass.
He is really, his time management and, he finds that extra ingredient. When Schumacher was winning everything in a Ferrari, and people used to say, oh, it's the car. And you know as well as I do, Guy, your car is never perfect every race. It never is.
No.
But Schumacher made it look like it was perfect. But you knew that there were times when his car wasn't quite right, but he made the difference.
Yeah.
And that was why, teammates, okay, Ferrari, maybe not the best example because in those days the teammate didn't necessarily have equal equipment. But, there were times when the teammate could get close to Michael Schumacher, still get beaten in the race. And other times that they're just not there.
Yeah.
And that's when they can't make the difference themselves that he would make consistently.
Yeah.
And that's what defines the exceptional drivers to me, rather than the merely very good who win on their day when everything aligns and is right. But that doesn't make them exceptional. Exceptional is what Hamilton does week in, week out, regardless of whether the car is 100% or not.
Last question
Brilliant.
before we go into the quick fire.
Yep.
Extreme E. Did you both of you actually? I watched that and I wanted to be excited about it, and I thought the format was a really good start. What do you think about it,
Tim?
It didn't really work for me. I've got to be honest. Obviously it didn't help when they started crashing into each other.
Yeah.
That didn't help particularly. It didn't really do it for me. I like the concept. I thought the actual structure of the event wasn't particularly good. But yeah, it's a bit more rallying based than racing based for me, if you like. But no, I wasn't blown away by it, and I'm not blown away by Formula E either.
So we can't see the possibility for Tim Harvey Extreme E team to line up against the Lewis Hamiltons and the Jenson Buttons of this world. Then
no, you're more likely to see them in a BSB paddock than in the Extreme E paddock.
Hey, now there's a possible scoop. We better move on to the quick fires before we get you in trouble.
Brilliant. Okay, so just some quick questions for you, Tim. Just first thing that comes into your mind.
Yeah.
First answer. So Top Gear or Grand Tour?
Top Gear.
Le Mans or BTCC?
Le Mans.
Beach holiday or adventure holiday?
Beach.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Oversteer or understeer?
Oversteer. I think you could guess that one.
Yeah, exactly. B&W 318 Coupe or Porsche Carrera Cup 2010?
Porsche Cup.
Okay. V6 or V8?
V8.
Okay. And our pass-along question from Emanuele Pirro is, which decade would you prefer to race in? It could be any type of racing, really.
You've got a head start having raced in some of the best.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd stick with the 90s. I think I had a pretty good run then.
I think you did. I think you did pretty well. Well. So Tim, have you managed to think of a question during this chat for our next guest?
I've been sitting here drinking beer.
Good man.
From my local brewery at Vista Heritage. So my question is going to be beer or wine?
Beer or wine? Fair enough. Both. But yeah, definitely fantastic.
So
okay,
we've back to the Super Touring story. I think we've wrapped that one up now, haven't we? The 92 season doesn't need to feature on the Spinning Wheels podcast again, because I don't think we're gonna improve, are we? That's it.
I think we've got first-hand accounts for all the legends. I think we've done that one. We've covered it, and what a great era. And it's been fantastic speaking with you, Tim. Really enjoyed it. Again, for me, certainly one of my heroes growing up. Racing in the 90s. I remember watching those touring car races firsthand and really enjoying them. And Porsche Carrera Cup, I think most winning driver in the Carrera Cup, certainly.
Yeah.
double champion.
That might go with Mr. Camish coming back this year.
Well, we'll see, but I mean, it's still no mean feat. What a career you've had. Both in the car and out of the car. I think you've done amazing things, obviously with the TV and you work with the BRDC, et cetera. So it's great that we get to hear and see you on TV. And thank you so much for coming onto our podcast. And
thank you very much.
We look forward to catching up as the world returns to normal, hopefully for some beers at some point in the future.
Definitely. I'm up for that.
Don't forget, if you're listening to this, wherever you download your podcast, you can also watch Spinning Wheels on YouTube. You can catch up with the John Cullen and the Steve Soper side of the 92 story and all the other 28 guests that we've had so far. 28, Guy, on the Spinning Wheels podcast that started as a bit of a thing to fill some time during lockdown 1, and it's still going on. So thank you for listening or watching or however you've got involved, and thanks for your questions to Tim as well.